Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. We're just gonna wait a couple more minutes until 11 o'clock to make sure everybody can sign on. Alrighty, it is 11 o'clock on the dot, so let's get started. Welcome to a new round of our ACE Your Science webinar. My name is Dr. Fiona Oxsher. I'm the Southeast Regional Sales Manager for ACE Glass. Just like all of my colleagues, I am a chemist and I've been with ACE Glass for just about 10 years. So I've dealt with glassware a lot and gathered a bunch of experience over the years. Today's topic is going to be glass safety. This is a repeat from our previous series since we have had a lot of requests for this again. So we will have about a 15-minute presentation, and then we will follow this by a question and answer session. If you look on your screen on the top right, there is a question window. Please feel free as we go along through the presentation to just type your question in there and send it over. I will go through the presentation and then answer all of the questions afterwards. So we'll just go get started. Like I said, our topic is laboratory safety. So typically when I go visit my customer, I just ask them random questions about several topics and then I list the answers. So over the last few months, I asked them, what is your first thought when you hear glass safety? And so most of them say, well, is there even such a thing? Or glass breaks, it's just, you're just going to cut yourself and you just put a band-aid on and move on. Or the most common answer is, well, I'm always safe most of the time. So overall, we typically get to the point where we find out there's actually more to know. So let's just go through there. The best quote for this is, there aren't many new accidents, but there sure are a lot of new victims. So we have had glass for many, many years. We've dealt with it a lot, but it still kind of happens. The human factor comes in, we break it, and we hurt ourselves. So let's try to find out how we can be more safe. So just a little bit about us. ACE Glass has been founded in 1936, and we have always been committed to addressing safety issues surrounding our laboratory glassware. Over the last almost 90 years, we have tried to introduce several safety features for the glass, and we will go over some of them in this presentation. So this is actually me while I was in college. I am part of the human factor, and I also break glassware. What you see on my head there used to be a 5-liter round bottom flask. I was setting it up for a reaction and I applied high temperature and pulled a pretty good vacuum on it. Let it kind of go overnight because it was a long reaction time. I came in the lab the next morning and it was broken right around the line of the heating mantle. And of course, all of my reaction fluid was spilled in my hood. It was a big mess. But of course, safety first, always put a paper towel on your head before you put broken glassware on it. So, but how could this even happen, right? So there are a few things we need to consider. Standard borosilicate glass, you should use only up to 230 degrees Celsius under standard pressure. You can use it for short times under extreme conditions of up to 400 degrees Celsius, but that should be the absolute max temperature for your glassware, in order for it not to get misshaped or lose its integrity. Our standard borosilicate glass has an expansion coefficient of 32.5 roughly, up to 33, which is about a third of common soft glass, which is like drinking glasses, which basically just means it expands and contracts slower than your standard drinkware, for example. Generally, you should avoid rapid changes from very cold to very hot and vice versa. I know they say, oh, Pyrex, you can do this. But really, the maximal thermal shock that you should expose your glassware to shouldn't be more than 80 degrees Celsius. And that is basically if I have very cold glassware and I pour boiling water in it, or any kind of heat, make sure the thermal shock is no greater than 80 degrees Celsius. Also, one very important thing is the pressure that we expose our glassware to. Standard lab glass should not be exposed to more than 15 psig, so 1 atmosphere. You shouldn't charge up your glass with nitrogen or argon, because that will cause it to explode. Most problems start, believe it or not, when we clean our glassware. And the biggest issue is that a lot of people try to get some gunk out of it and use wire brushes or abrasive pads. Or it just happens that you have your glassware in the sink and you clean it and you bump it a little bit on the edge of the sink. And overall, that can very easily cause tension in the glassware. So if your glass breaks, always make sure you dispose of it properly, preferably in a trash can that is not completely overfilled. And before you use it, after you cleaned your glassware, always inspect it so that you don't see any kind of cracks in it. And we'll look at that in a short while, a little closer. So when cleaning your glassware, you should actually only wash it with like a strong soap, and then rinse it with DI water and air dry it ideally. So strong soaps would be like Alkanox, Chromerge, something like that would work best. If you do have organic substances in it, of course, use some solvent, maybe previous to the cleaning process, to dissolve it and kind of get that out first before you clean it with soap. You can use diluted acid, such as acetic acid or chromic acid, but then always make sure to rinse with DI water. Ultrasonic cleaners can work well. However, they do have their limitations because the ultrasonic energy actually can cause kind of your glassware to go blind. Do not ever use a strong acid such as HF in your glassware. It will straight up dissolve it, and then we have bigger issues to deal with. All right. Then when you have cleaned your glassware, always inspect it prior to a new use. So this picture that you see here, that's a polariscope. That would be the ideal case if you have something like that in your lab. Most people do not. Some people have pocket polariscopes, which come in very handy, but even that sometimes is not possible. So the easiest way to really inspect your glassware is to hold it up towards the window and look at it in the sunlight, or if you are in a lab that doesn't have windows, just hold it up to a bright light and just turn it, make sure you don't see any cracks. Ideally, you would do both. So when you look at glass under a polariscope, what you want to see is, as you can see here, just nice kind of rainbow colors, nothing that kind of looks like a zigzag or like a flash, because that would mean that there's tension in the glass, right? So If we look here, the right picture is a very relaxed glass. On the left, we see this is where the hose barb is attached, and there's still a lot of stress in the glassware. So ideally, we would anneal it, get the stress out of the glassware in order to relax it and avoid potential accidents in the future. Then also, I've showed these pictures earlier, but this is just a round bottom. You can see, I don't know if you can see my mouse index, but there are some cracks here. I also tried to put arrows on it so you can see it. And when you zoom in on that, those are star fractures. Sometimes people think, well, they look very small, it's all good, but really they can expand very rapidly, very quickly, especially if you heat it or you cool it, or you change the pressure, right? So this is very crucial. If you see a star fracture, ideally get rid of that glassware. A lot of issues that we also find is that people get stuck joints and stopcocks. So a lot of times you have a standard taper joint and you put some grease on it to make it seal very well, and then you put your stopcock on there or another joint, and when your reaction is over, you just cannot get it apart. So ideally, if you have small lap glass, you would put it in the freezer. That's the easiest way to go about it. Leave it in there for a while, and then try to twist it. They should be contracted enough to where you can get them apart easily. Some people prefer to use a heat gun. That is a tricky situation because if you don't constantly move it, you can get a hot spot in it and you can cause the glass to lose its integrity. Also, it's important to point out you should always wear oven mitts to not burn your fingers, right? The glass does get very hot. Ideally, if you have an on-site glass blower, I know some companies and some universities still have one, just bring it to them. They are specialists with that. They can do that super easy and help you get that joint unstuck. The same is true for PTFE in glass. So sometimes even if you have a PTFE stopcock or a joint sleeve, even that can get stuck. Again, easiest thing is to just put it in the freezer or refrigerator overnight and then just gently twist it apart. You can use an ultrasonic bath to do that. Again, the vibration and the energy from the ultrasonic waves can help with that. Never put glass too long in it, as it will get kind of blind. But ideally, PTFE is a lot more gentle on glass and to get it unstuck. So ideally, you would use like a Teflon sleeve or a PTFE sleeve or even a PTFE stopcock to close your joints. All right, I know it sounds very common sense, but we actually do see this more often than you believe. It is very important that you do use a proper vessel size for your reaction. And so most of you guys probably go, well, duh, right? But it is important that if you know, okay, you're going to have an overall reaction volume in the end of like 4 liters, to use at least a 6-liter size vessel, right? So the rule of thumb is to take the volume of your reaction and add 50% for your container so that you have adequate room should there be any kind of foaming or bubbling, any kind of liquid expansion that you didn't expect, right? Any kind of gas formation that causes it to go up. So just keep these things in mind. That is very important. And then also always keep in mind that if you're doing a new reaction, there might be an exotherm that you didn't expect. So always keep in mind if you get close to your 230-degree limit and you might go over, maybe consider a specialty class such as quartz, just to be on the safe side. All right, so with that, we're almost at the end. I do want to say it's typically easier to ask a silly question than to fix a silly mistake. So with that said, please feel free to ask me whatever you can come up with. I will do my best to answer all of your questions. Keep in mind, safety doesn't slow down the job, but any kind of accident do. So it's a pain to fill out all the paperwork. So rather try to take that extra minute to throw a step in there that you think, well, I maybe could skip that, but it will improve your safety. With that said, are there any questions? All right, let me get over here in my question window. All right, what is the vacuum rating for Pyrex or Borosilicate glass? So there's always big debates, right? And people say, well, I mean, I can always, I have pulled it down to low vac and to this and that. The rule of thumb is if you have standard bore silica glass, you can go to plus minus 1 bar. So you should keep it at 1 bar on the positive pressure side and at minus 1 bar on the negative pressure side. Of course, you can always go a little bit lower and inch your way to the real edge there, but that would be the safe frame you want to be in. Will the webinar recording be sent to a platform afterwards? Yes, so this is actually something I was going to address later, but you can actually see all of our webinars on our YouTube channel if you want to join in at a later time and view them there. All right. When I say pressure glass, what specifically am I talking about? Okay, so regular standard wall borosilica glass is typically rated up to, like I said, 15 psig or 1 bar, right? There is glass that has heavier wall sizes, right? That can take higher pressure. So for example, if you ever find yourself with just a couple of minutes extra, go into our catalog and have a look. We have designated pressure glassware. So what is special about it is, like I said, it has heavier set walls, but also there are mostly round corners, right? The more round we can keep a glass, the more stable we make it, right? So we do have glassware that is rated up to 45 psig, right? Or some even to some of our pressure tubes are even rated much higher, to 90 or even 100 psig, right? That just simply highly depends on the glass thickness and on the shape of the glassware. Quartz also has higher pressure ratings. So if you do anything above 1 atmosphere, maybe just consider the glass type that you are using, and maybe just ask me or your rep if the vessel that you have would be appropriate. There are cleaning equipment on the market for very heavy organic waste, such as asphalt or similar. These devices polarize contaminants at very high temperatures. How does this affect laboratory glassware? Okay, so when you go to high temperatures and you basically pyrolyze it, right? That just simply means you burn it all off, right? I am not exactly sure to what temperature these devices go, but if they go up to 300-400 degrees, which probably would be sufficient to burn it off, technically that would be fine, right? But what can happen, keep in mind, borosilica glass is just simply silica dioxide, right? So on the surface, you do have functional groups exposed. You do have OH groups. What can happen is that you actually do get cavities on the surface. And when you start to expose these high temperatures, you can actually cause kind of a reaction between whatever you have there and your surface. So you can compromise your glassware and over a long time really cause it to lose its integrity, to cause cavities, to cause enclosures in the glassware, and then it loses its stability. So generally we would say be very careful with that. That can be a tricky thing. Hold on. Where was I? If glass is fogged up from hot alkaline reactants, is that permanent or can it be fixed? No, unfortunately, that is pretty permanent. That is when you have a compromised crystal structure. Basically, you have enclosures or gaps in there that cause that visual effect on it. If your glass does start to look foggy or blind, then actually the damage is already pretty high and you really want to get rid of that. Okay, hold on. What else do we have here? How much of an advantage is the heavy wall compared to the regular? Well, it really depends on what kind of chemistry you're doing, right? If you do go to higher pressures, the heavy wall will for sure be the safer option. If you just have, a standard acid-base reaction, a regular wall is going to be sufficient, right? Typically, we recommend heavy wall if we go, like I said, to higher pressures or if we have larger volumes, right? So our larger reaction vessels, they also going to have heavier walls than, let's say, 100 milliliter round bottom, right? Oh boy, okay, there are a lot of questions. Um, what kind of analysis testing is done to qualify bore silica glass for plus minus 1 bar? So we actually do not do any kind of testing or analysis in-house. We do have a quality control department where we use a polariscope to look at it and to just look overall on the dimensions. If everything is set there, but the limitation that I gave you there is actually given by Pyrex. So Pyrex is a brand name basically of glass, right? So since we don't actually make the raw glass, we take our specification from our suppliers. So all of our glass comes in tubing and we then blow it into the shape that it should be. And so that analysis would probably come from Pyrex. I can try to look further into that. I'll hold on. I will write down your email as a matter of fact, and I can send you more info if I find it. Okay. All right. Let's see. What did I mean by glass going blind? So if you have ever had glassware and you like hold it up against a light source and you just see a pristine crystal clear glass, that would be a perfect glass, right? But sometimes when you use harsh chemicals or put it in an ultrasonic cleaner, it slowly kind of starts to get a haze on it, right? And it's not quite as pristine anymore. As that progresses, it gets more kind of cloudy and almost kind of whitish. And in very extreme cases, you actually cannot look through the glass anymore. In that case, it would be fully blind. That is what I mean with going blind, when it starts to get this haze and gets whiter and whiter instead of being crystal clear. What email address can you use to contact me with application questions? Yes, so that would be f_Oxsher, Oxsher, at aceglass.com. Or you can always use our general aceglass sales email address. That would be sales@aceglass.com, and they will forward it to whoever is the sales rep in your area, and we will be happy to discuss your questions with you. What is the difference between glass and quartz? How to transfer glass into quartz? Okay, so the main question is, the main difference is that glass is boresilicate, right? So clearly you have boron as a third element in this. Quartz is strictly silicate, SiO2, right? Not SSI, SiO2. So you just simply, the main difference is the crystal structure, how it's organized, and what kind of pressure and temperatures it can take, right? It's just simply the additional element that is in there that differentiates the boresilicate from the quartz. For someone working with lots of grease, vegetable oil, or oily polymers, what would be your suggestion for safe cleaning, particularly for stubborn, stuck on grease, especially where standard solvents and cleaners are ineffective? Ha! That is a very tricky question. So, this kind of all depends on what polymers you use. I do have some customers that have a kind of a cleaning series where they use toluene and hexane and kind of make their way down to eventually ethanol and then water. This is very specific. A lot of times when we do have somebody where just regular organic solvents don't do anything, um, they typically do try to use abrasive material to clean it, and unfortunately, that typically ends up with the vessel breaking. Um, that is unfortunately something where I don't have a standard, hey, yeah, this is the best way answer. Um, Please feel free to email me and I will see for your particular case if there's a recommendation I can give. All right. All right. Is there a safety coding for high pressure? Yes. So on the safety side, especially if you have high pressure. So like, for example, a lot of times people use pressure on chromatography columns, right? So it has become very common that we actually do a polymer coating on those columns so that should they break, glass doesn't just fly everywhere, right? We actually can contain it. It's kind of very similar if you think of it like a glass windshield on your car. There is a polymer coating on it so that if you get in an accident, it kind of spider webs everywhere, right? But it doesn't really fly everywhere to hurt you. So the same thing is possible with coatings on lab glass. So that is absolutely a possibility. Um, there is there are also always the possibilities, especially if you have, let's say, a reaction vessel or a round bottom where you are afraid of adding pressure and it exploding or something like that, to actually use PTFE vessels. So instead of glass, full on Teflon vessels basically. Again, that is something, if you want to learn more, contact myself or one of my colleagues and we'll be able to give you suggestions on what might be best. At what point is a flask too dirty or has too much residue to the point where it is no longer safe to use? That is also a tricky question. Really, it kind of depends on what you're doing, right? So if you have an ultra sensitive reaction where you need super pristine glassware, that might contaminate your reaction if you start out with a dirty glass vessel, right? I don't know what exactly you are doing, so that is tricky to answer. Overall, I would say when you can see a visual deposit on your glassware, and you do more than just simply, let's say, distill off a solvent or something like that, I would say it's time to toss it and just get a replacement. Hold on. Do we have any literature about glass safety? Yes, we indeed do. And as a matter of fact, we have a flyer about glass safety, and that is attached in our seminar up on the top right, I believe. Or you can go to our website, www.aceglass.com, and go to our literature tab. You can find all kinds of informative flyers there. Also, if you are interested, if you think, well, this might be something that our whole lab has to hear, we are also always happy to actually schedule a more in-depth safety seminar with your group or with your lab. That would pretty much be something, again, to contact your sales rep. And if you go to our website, you can find all of our contact information there. And we will be happy to either show up in person or do it as a webinar just like this, and go over some more details. We can also talk a little bit more in depth over about things that specifically apply to you. Let's say if you use pressure glass or if you use large reaction vessels. We can address all of that a little bit better in those cases. Alrighty, I think with that, I hope I have addressed everything. If I have overlooked your question, because there came a lot of questions in here, please feel free to shoot me an email or send it to sales@aceglass.com, and we will be more than happy to answer your questions. Thank you very much for attending our webinar to kick off this new series of Ace Your Science. Our next webinar will be on May 15th, again at 11 o'clock Eastern Time. Our webinars are always on the third Thursday, so that should be pretty easy to remember. On the next webinar, we will talk about condensers. Also, as I mentioned earlier, if you want to follow up and just revisit something from this webinar, please go to our YouTube channel and you can always watch it again there. Thank you very much, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week and a happy Easter, and we'll see you again soon.